culture as strategy. I'm going to introduce the fine folks on the panel here, and really excited to share some insights from the COVID Check Colorado experience at Gary Community Ventures over the last couple of years, and get some stories from folks who made it happen, both on the team in-house and as part of our amazing array of community partners. I'm Eric Puri. I'm the Vice President of Builds at Gary Community Ventures, and I was the CEO of COVID Check Colorado. To my left, in order, we have Becky Crow, who was the CEO of Clayton Early Learning. To her left is Tara Avila, who started off as a tester at one of our COVID Check testing sites and rose all the way up to the most senior operational role, overseeing a vaccine operations team of several hundred people across the state. To her left is Emily Barron, who's our a co-founder of the effort and our Chief Public Health Officer. And to her left is Brian Hyatt. He was also a co-founder, and he was our CTO at COVID Check. So we are all geeks for team culture and org culture. Really excited to share some headlines from our experience at COVID Check, and then hopefully also supply a bunch of just moves that you can steal, take, and use in your own team or organization or venture that might be ahead of you. So I'll just give a quick summary of what COVID Check was, why we've taken it upon ourselves to talk to you about the culture of it in particular. And then I'll have a number of questions for the esteemed panel here, and then we're going to open it up pretty quickly to questions from you all that you might have, either about COVID Check or about cultural and leadership challenges you're encountering in your own organizations. So COVID Check Colorado, or CCC, is a social venture that was incubated at Gary Community Ventures here in Denver. We're a foundation that was created just about 50 years ago by Sam and Nancy Gary, specifically to serve low-income kids and families across the Denver metro area. Something that the foundation had never done before was engage in a direct way in healthcare or public health. So COVID Check was, to some extent, a departure from a long tradition at the foundation. And in some ways, it was a beautiful realization of Sam and Nancy's work over the prior decades, because Sam's belief was that business, policy, and philanthropy should complement and support each other to create great outcomes for kids and families. And COVID Check is, in a lot of ways, an example of that combination of business, policy, and philanthropy. So just a quick hit on some data. We started as a conference call of about 4 or 5 people in April of 2020. 9 months later, we were a nationwide team of over 1,500 people. We started with a pup tent in the parking lot of a daycare. We ended up having 50 COVID testing and vaccination locations across Colorado, and operating in 5 other states on what I call the other 3 coasts: East Coast, West Coast, and Gulf Coast. That's where I'm from. We had partner organizations and clients that ranged from Fortune 50 companies to the state of Colorado to multiple universities and public colleges across the country. And our board had started us as a social venture. So they provided philanthropic capital as our seed money, but basically said you needed to create a business model that covers your costs, and anything that you bring in over and above that, you funnel back into the business. You funnel back into social impact and delivering tests and vaccine doses to the communities that are least likely to get them otherwise, and that will yield the biggest impact on health equity across the state and the country. So we went out and we did that to the tune of over 2 million tests, 300,000 vaccine doses, and an independent analysis from the Commonwealth Fund estimates that we saved, our part of the vaccine effort here in Colorado saved over 5,000 lives in the spring of 2021. So by a lot of measures, we had real success we were excited about and proud of. And I think I can speak for all of us here to say that whatever part we held in the effort, it felt like a blessing and a privilege. And I think for many of us, a deep education. Maybe a less fancy way to put that is it was a crash course in a lot of things. One of them is the thing we're going to talk to you about here today, which is using culture of an organization with predominantly staffed with folks who did not have experience in pharma or biotech or healthcare, using culture as strategy. So rather than trying to say culture eats strategy for breakfast or vice versa, it's to say actually that they're so enmeshed that you shouldn't try to disentangle them. You should use culture as the fuel and the spark for your strategy, and it should match the specific role and place your organization fills in the market and in society. Okay, that's my breathless intro. I'm going to now let most of the talking happen from the wonderful folks here to my left. So the first question I want to throw is over to Emily, who again is our Chief Public Health Officer. And my question for you is, how would you define or describe the culture of CCC, of COVID Check, in 3 words or phrases? And what was your personal contribution to or riff on that culture?
Okay, the three words that I'm going to choose are nimble, motivating, and community. And a very short story to talk about my own contribution to that culture was, if you were joining COVID Check from day one, we were asking you to go above and beyond a job description that you likely didn't get. So that meant 7 days a week, often punishing hours and long and hard work. And I remember a conversation with you early, Eric, where it was like I was feeling a little bit guilty about having to ask that over and over again. And then like at some points frustrated that I had to ask that. So in our conversation, I said something like, come on, this is emergency response. And that actually became a mantra that was like quite celebrated on the team because, it meant that we were always going to say yes because we were here to serve our community.
Great, thanks. Okay, great. Brian, I want to throw this one to you next. Brian was our founding CTO and ended up leading a team of developers, of data analysts, and then also managing a whole array of external tech partners as well. Brian, my question for you is about like a blending and braiding of cultures. So we had some set pieces at CCC. We had a mission statement. We had core values. We had a bunch of goofy rituals that and just more workaday rituals. You also have had a long career prior to this in the tech sector, and specifically tech for social good and tech for social impact. I'm curious what parts of that professional culture and world you would see as having brought into the COVID Check culture to good effect.
Sure, thanks. So like in tech, structure is just really amazing, right? We're working with engineers and analysts on my team. They expect a lot of structure, which in the environment of CCC is almost like a swirling vortex of chaos around a very structured group of engineers and analysts trying to get work done and ship it quickly. So I think there's a lot of obvious things that we exported to the culture particularly as we scaled, like processes, agile, iterative development, project management tools, spreadsheets that we needed to survive as a tech team in that level of chaos. So I think that's the obvious answer. I think maybe the more interesting piece that we brought to CCC and the entire adventure through both testing and vaccines was the idea of being able to ship value quickly, particularly in a healthcare setting, being able to put out products that are delivering value on a day-to-day basis that may not feel completely done, like completely fully fleshed out. I think Rebecca Peterson, who is like our amazing project manager in this effort, called it flawed but fabulous at one point. That really empowered us to move much faster than a lot of different groups in the system, and we just got really good at rolling with that and really celebrating getting that value to families, and then kind of watching what happens and reacting as fast as we could to kind of adapt the product and the tech and all those pieces.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, I'm going to come back this direction. Tara, the next question I have is for you. I'm just delighted to be, I haven't been able to, the number of times I've actually been in a room with Tara is very small because another dimension of this whole effort was this massive team of hundreds of people, by and large, never met in person. We were almost fully remote from the beginning, unless you were fully in PPE on a test or a vaccine site. Those were sort of the two modes in which we worked. You were on a Zoom call, or you were swabbing someone's nose or stabbing their arm. Those were the kind of the two ways you operated at COVID Check. So it's still a little surreal for me to be like, Tara's a real person. She has legs. So I could spend the balance of the time bragging about Tara, but we also at COVID Check had a 1.0 and a 2.0 version, was what we called it. 1.0 was basically our first year plus of operation, and then that came to a close right around July of 2021, which, if you remember, was this valley in case counts, in hospitalizations, in deaths. It seemed like the vaccination rate was going up at the same time that the case counts were going down in such a way that like we might get out ahead of the next variant and be out of the woods. So our plan was basically to be true to our emergency response spirit and wind COVID Check down. We were not trying to create the next unicorn company that was going to disrupt and take over the whole healthcare industry. It was like, we're here to take care of Coloradans and to folks the healthcare systems have typically disfavored here and around the country. Once we've done that, we're going to shut our doors. So 2.0 was going to be the like wind down, shut our doors version. And so Tara at that point had taken on one of the most senior leadership roles in the organization in operations. And then surprise, surprise, or maybe not so surprising to some, Delta and then Omicron came. So what she actually presided over was a scale down, a massive scale up, and then another scale down all in the course of a year. And that was one part of the story of 2.0. So all that wind up, Tara, to say, how was the culture of 2.0 different with a different leadership team, a team that was in many ways much more streamlined, and then that had to scale up again. How was that culture different than 1.0, and what did you do to try to enhance it and take it further than we'd been able to in the first year?
Yeah, so during the 1.0, obviously we were just constantly in build state. So during 2.0, we had the opportunity to be more mindful and thoughtful of establishing a team culture. In addition to our core values, we came up with some culture values that included things like professionalism, teamwork, assumption of goodwill. We had several. And then on top of that, we also really tried to fortify gratitude among our teams to really let people know how much they were appreciated for the difference they were making for the community. These were people that were taking steps. They were giving up their own time with their families. They were spending more time with their COVID Check teams than their own homes and families. And we just really wanted to make sure people felt appreciated for what they were doing, for being out in the heat and in sub-zero temperatures, and sometimes being so bored that people wanted to fall asleep, and other times being so busy that there was no time to eat lunch. So really keeping that focus on gratitude, really just keeping people engaged as much as we could. We encouraged music and games, and we would try to end meetings with icebreaker questions, get to know you questions, and really just form that sense of family and foundation.
Thanks, Tara. Okay, my next question is for the one to my left here, Becky Crow, an amazing civic leader here in Denver for a long time, and most recently at Clayton Early Learning, which is just a model and flagship of equity and community engagement, and just like caring for families and kids, located near the intersection of MLK and Colorado. Clayton was one of our first partners. Like a lot of startups, we were just at the beginning desperate for clients or customers or people who would even take us seriously on a phone call. And Becky was willing to take that risk with us and on us in the early going. And it was one of many, many, many partnerships with many different kinds of organizations around the state and the country that made the whole thing go and work. And as we were prepping for this and looking back, we were trying to reverse engineer, like, what made a partnership work? Like, what were the ingredients of a good combo between a couple of organizations? And one of the things we landed on was that there was compatible culture between the two. So it was tempting for me on like a business level to be like, oh yeah, well, if like we can come to terms on a contract, like that's going to be a partnership. It'll work. It's going to be great. And actually that was like the least powerful indicator. Culture was way more powerful. So Becky, I'm curious to hear about what you tried to instill and inculcate as the culture at Clayton, and what overlap or compatibility you saw between that culture and the culture of Kovacheck, Colorado.
Great. So I'm going to give a little bit of context about Clayton because I think it matters in terms of how we came together. But if you've driven on either Martin Luther King or Colorado and seen a 20-acre campus with some red brick buildings as you drive by that intersection, there's a lot of people drive by every day and don't know what's going on back there. But that is a campus that's been around in Denver since 1911. Actually, it was opened as an orphanage 110 years ago. So this plays into the what does it look like when you don't get to build the culture from scratch and you're inheriting a culture that's actually been around for over 100 years. And in this case at Clayton, we served, there's about 7,000 kids birth to 5 in the Denver area who live in, say, a family of 4 under about a $25,000 salary, so under the poverty line. And we serve about 500 of those families at Clayton. And so taking us back to March 2020, when we had to close our campus, for our kids and families not having childcare, the vast majority of our parents and caregivers were reliant upon jobs that were hourly wage jobs. They couldn't miss them. They needed their kids to be taken care of in a safe environment. And if you can, it's hard. We've normalized it a little bit now, I think. But if you go back to March of 2020, when there was so little known about what was going on with the pandemic, is it safe to have kids in school? Is it safe? Can you get the virus from 2-year-olds? We had so many questions at that point. And I had an organization, I had only been there about a year at that point, but that had really, it's a highly regulated industry. I mean, literally we have people coming to check the hot water temperature to make sure it's within 2 degrees. That's the world of early childhood. And so you can imagine that kind of environment does not breed a lot of innovation. It doesn't breed typically the ability to ask a lot of questions about how might we do something different. And so even prior to Kovacheck, I knew we wanted to do some big and different things on the campus there. And so we actually ran an internal design challenge with another partner where we invited teachers and other staff members to come together. The only requirement was that they were trying to solve a problem at Clayton and that they had to come together across teams. And so it had to have, if your team had some teachers, you had to have a policy person on your team or a finance person or someone from our landscaping crew. I mean, literally it could, across our whole organization and just start working through the design cycle. And it was amazing. 35 people of our 200 opted into this design challenge. And it started to seed the culture that I was trying to drive for. And so when we were trying to figure out how to reopen in June of 2020, which, it was probably almost a year before most of the K-12 system went back in person, it was a necessity for our families. Our kids also got 80% of their calories from school every week. So we had to figure out how to stand up a food bank within about 4 days, or our families were not going to have access to diapers, to wipes, to food, et cetera. And so in this context, I sent a letter to our colleague at Gary and said, and to several others, and just said, if we're trying to take people back to work in person, and our frontline, basically our early childhood educators are frontline workers in the same way that nurses in hospitals are. My team is 70% women of color, most of whom living on salaries under $40,000 a year, many of whom had other health conditions that meant getting sick would be super problematic for them or for their families. And so there was just a ton of risks to navigate. I know I'll land the plane here, but basically we reached out to our teammates at what would become Kovacheck, Colorado, and just said, we've got to have our educators essentially having access to whatever the cutting edge is around this pandemic. And what we know for sure is we need to figure out a way to do asymptomatic testing of both of our kids, our families, and our educators to get people back in person. And so sort of sent this, shot in the dark letter out to say, who wants to play with us on this? Is anybody doing something? And little did I know, the conference table was already happening. And I think what brought us together was, number one, the absolute no barriers vision, the ability to picture something that may or may not have ever existed before, but that could be a possibility. So that aspirational thinking, but also really importantly, and kudos to the ops team, but the ability to translate big vision into very concrete, excellent execution, and that was our experience with the partnership. It was incredible. So we played on 4th of July weekend with our first go of this, our first iteration. That was the third part of the culture, was just total shared values around iterating and ability to put something that's not perfect out there and just continually improve it until we get it right.
Yeah, thanks so much, Becky, and thanks again for being willing to go in the trenches with us on this. Part of what really struck me about what you were just saying is I think another common element between COVID Check and Clayton is that really there was an attempt to bring a startup ethos and a startup set of approaches within an institution or an organization that had been around for decades, and also that was part of a bigger sector where speed, agility, fail to win kind of approaches are not the standard or not the default. Emma, I want to come back to you with a question that's related to that, which is I mentioned at the top that the overwhelming majority of people in the organization, including folks who rose to quite senior levels of leadership, were not decades experienced healthcare professionals or biotech professionals. And yet these were some of our very best people. Some of them were super young, like this was their second job. Some of them had come direct from a very different kind of taking care of people, like serving coffee at DCPA or waiting tables at somewhere else downtown. And my question for you, as someone who managed a lot of these folks and also yourself went from being, you were co-founder and intern for the first couple of months, to being, a C-suite officer of a company with 1,500 people. Tell me about this leadership pathway and what is it that made it possible for relatively unqualified, quote unquote, folks to actually deliver outstanding results for hundreds of thousands of patients?
I think it's interesting to read and hear about companies right now struggling to find good talent and talent as a lot of things that people often refer to as the number one reason why something was successful. Like, we hired great talent. I think COVID Check broke a mold on this idea that actually I learned through you and through your work in schools, which is that you have to believe in the ability of every single person to grow. Your talent is often there. If you set people up to succeed, you ask them to do ambitious things and then remove barriers and give them the supports they need in order to do those ambitious things. And I think that was a beautiful thing at COVID Check, and it was unexpected maybe. One example is Joshua Posner, a colleague of ours who had only worked at a summer camp before and came in when I desperately decided that we needed a director of quality assurance, which I'm not sure he'd ever even used the word quality before, didn't know how to define quality, but we talked a lot about early on what he did at camp and how he led teams and how he ensured excellent and consistent experiences for campers. And all of a sudden this strength-based assessment of actual experience that he's had and know-how that he had was very easy to translate into asking him to basically build an entire quality department, eventually that scaled statewide. So I think belief in the ability of your people to grow is core and was the total reason that every single person in this group was able to accomplish the things that we did.
Love me some Joshua Posner. Great. Brian, I'm coming back to you. I'm curious about so this is back to the old chestnut on culture eat strategy for breakfast, or no, Zappos has pets in the office and a bunch of neon, but really they just figured out a supply chain problem, and so that's all just window dressing. I think our experience has been like I said at the top, that really you need both and have to infuse each other. I'm curious though, to the critic who would say more of the Zappos critique I said just there. Like, culture is the soft stuff, and really any business, especially a business, only survives on the hard stuff of like profit, NPS, staff retention, hitting KPIs and OKRs, this kind of thing. So my question for you is, what evidence do you have? What hard evidence do you have that was a result of the soft stuff, the culture from CCC?
I think there's like multiple answers to that. I think Emily has talked a bit about how everybody was willing to go above and beyond. Sorry about the papers. Everyone was willing to go above and beyond, and that was almost entirely, I think, due to the culture that Eric actually played a really incredible role. It was wacky, it was wild. It took something that was very serious a lot of the time with emergency response and made it lighthearted enough for us all to get through every day and really focus on what was important. Like, where there's an interesting one example of where I think that mixes interestingly is, while we had a fun, wacky culture, it was very rooted in data. So we actually had two. That's louder than I've ever talked. We actually had two metrics that drove a lot of our day-to-day operations. During testing, it was the number of tests that we could deliver in a day, and we were shooting for a target of around 10,000 per day. In vaccines, it was the number of vaccines we could deliver. We also had, on the flip side, a metric for NPS. So a lot of folks here are probably familiar with Net Promoter Score, a measure of customer loyalty. We're tracking both really closely. The main goals, we called them wildly important goals. They were WIGs, really. And everyone was obsessively trying to meet these goals all the way from the very top down to every team. Every team implemented different strategies so that even on a personal level, everyone understood how they were meeting those. And on the cultural level, every team meeting was really shouting out those numbers, where we were at, what we needed to change, all the way to the extent that, like, wildly important goal, the acronym is WIGs. At one point, we started shipping out WIGs to everybody on the team, and when we'd hit that wildly important goal, everybody would show up to the Zoom meeting wearing like just crazy bright colored wigs. So I just point to culture as, like, I've never seen such an obsession with data that felt so fun and so effortless. A lot of times there's a lot of accountability necessary to get everybody to follow these systems, but at COVID Check, because of just the passion that was coming from all of those different cultural moves, it just felt fun, and the data just really became the shared language that was just super powerful.
Love it. There's one other, I promised you that we'd try to give you some moves you can steal or concepts you can put to work right away in your own organization. So Em, I'm going to come back to you. Do you mind talking through this concept of the I-shaped teammate or the I-shaped employee, and maybe give an example of how that worked at CCC?
Heard of a T-shaped person? That's both breadth and depth in work, and that's a commonly used thing to describe somebody that can sort of stand on the balcony and be strategic, but also has deep expertise in something. We made up an I-shaped person, and the bottom of the I is the operating below license work. So the often dirty work, the on-the-ground work, the driving the van to deliver the PPE, the moving of the coffee cups, the work that actually is critical often, and also connects you deeply to the actual thing being done. That I think what's unique about us is at COVID Check, everybody had to do bottom of the I stuff, but not only did we have to do it, we would say we get to do it. It's the kind of work that, like, we delight in, because we're not just being executives and, like, thinking about strategy. We're using all different pieces of the I to flex our muscles and make sure that we're delivering impact to the community. And so that also became sort of a way to make sure we were hiring for the right kind of people. If you weren't willing to do bottom of the I stuff, this probably wasn't the right place for you.
Love it. Thanks. Tara, question for you. I'm just curious about you personally and ways you saw yourself grow or develop, either as a result of or as a part of CCC culture, COVID Check culture.
Well, if it wasn't for the groundwork that you laid, and as Emily said, coming in as from the different backgrounds, I wouldn't be here today if they hadn't seen something in me and hadn't given me the opportunity. But part of the whole culture of it is just recognizing that people are making an impact, but as Brian said, also trying to not take ourselves so seriously, to have fun in the job. One of the things I tried to focus on is that our teams, when we were faced with the pandemic, everybody ran towards the pandemic. Everybody went to it. And that meant doing the dirty work. That meant wearing the PPE, throwing out the trash, picking up the swabs, and really just trying to, what I took away from it personally is that I didn't realize something like that existed in previous jobs. And it really had a very deep impact on me personally, just understanding that people do make a difference and they go into it for the right reasons. Nobody was in it for the money. Nobody was in it for the glory. We were all in it because it was important to stop COVID and to take the steps that we needed to do. But everybody went into it not knowing that's what they were doing, maybe. And embracing the differences and embracing the forms of culture that we had on our teams and getting in there and doing the dirty work and being excited about it because it was important, and people really recognize that. As a leader, every single person here showed up on a site at one point or another, and we're down in the trenches, and it was fun. It really was fun, and we could take away from that. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Starfish poem. Take a minute to Google that. But it really just involved making a difference in one person's life and carrying on from there. And that's what I've carried on with me for the most part since and during COVID check time.
Thanks, Tara. We're going to do, I'll have a couple more questions for panelists here, and then would love to just open the conversation up to you all out here who are in the audience. So Becky, I'm going to come back to you before I open it up. Emily and I have read a book recently by Ben Horowitz of Horowitz Andreessen, the big VC firm in the Bay, and he's written a number of books. One of them recently is basically the whole book's about team culture, and he talks about the value of having shocking rules in a culture, which is itself sort of a shocking phrase, but basically the way he defines the concept is like it's a mindset or a practice or even a mantra that people on your team and in your culture are really enthusiastic about and excited to embrace, but that may seem weird or unconventional or even like wrong-headed to the average observer on the outside. So just to give you an example from a prior organization, I taught at a turnaround high school in the Ninth Ward, New Orleans, for a number of years, and we had several of these shocking rules or mantras. But one of them was we teach amazing and powerful individuals, and the average kid coming into that school was 5 years behind grade level, as a ninth grader was coming out on a fourth grade reading level, was eligible for free lunch. Had likely, due to gun violence in the neighborhood, Hurricane Katrina, and health inequities, endured multiple acute traumas as a kid. And what we said to ourselves and what we said to those same kids every day when they walked in is, you're amazing and powerful. That's going to be the premise of all of our interactions with you. Not that you are damaged, not that you are behind, not that you are difficult, not that you are, any of those things. And that just totally changed the way you entered every conversation with a kid, which is as someone whose potential you had the real burden of trying to help realize, rather than as a problem you had to solve. My experience with other organizations that are outstanding, like Clayton under your leadership, is they've all got something shocking like that to the outside observers, like, sure, that maybe that's what's on the poster, or that's just a crazy idea, or whatever, but it actually is something that people there really believe and act on. So with that big wind-up, I'm curious if there were shocking rules or mindsets that were typical for you or your staff at Clayton, maybe particularly during the pandemic era.
Yeah, it's a great question. The first place my head went, and we share this education background, Eric and I, but I think that I spent a long time when I arrived there as a new CEO talking to people, and people talk about doing a listening tour, but I think I talked to 165 of our 180 people, and what came from that was talking to people who'd been a part of Clayton for literally generations, where they teach their grandkids go there, their nieces, nephews, like 3, 4, 5 generations of connection to that space and place, and not always feeling honored in that space and place. And there's a huge history to that, and a racial history to that, because it started as an orphanage for white boys and now serves almost 100% kids of color and families of color. Majority staff members of color. And so what had always, since I was a little girl, resonated for me, it was Dr. King talks about the beloved community, and a community that's actively working against poverty, actively working against racism and violence, militarism. And so for us, the beloved community became that anchor in terms of, and I don't know if it was, I think what was shocking about it is that it hadn't been centered in that way before, and especially George Floyd was killed 3 days before we came back in person, and we had a lot of teachers who were scared to come back to begin with, and on top of this, we were all managing a lot emotionally, but to be able to have that beacon of, we are trying to create a place that even if the rest of the world is feeling like it's crumbling around us right now, this is going to be a safe place for kids to show up every day. It's going to be a safe place for teachers to show up. And I think that tied back to we are going to do everything to live into that value, including our COVID testing, because that is part of what it means to take care of our people right now.
I love it. Well, I'm going to let that be the closing word for the panel. Would love to open it up to questions any of you might have about the COVID check experience, our reflections or insights on culture more broadly, anything else that might be present to you or top of mind at the moment. Hey, Scott.
Emily, my question's for you. How do you hire the I-shaped person?
So one tactic we employed we call it inoculation hiring, and the meaning of that is you say, do not take this job if, and it's a fairly intense thing to do at the end of like an interview process or a performance task, but it's a real like telling way to sort of put the pressure on the other person to, even before they decide to step into the job, to say yes to things like doing bottom of the eye work. So I think across all of our roles, if you were hiring somebody, you made up 3 different points that they were bound to encounter in their first day or first week at COVID Check. And this was a way to ensure somebody was going to say a resounding yes to that bottom of the eye stuff. Anyone else want to add to that?
Just a quick addendum. I think you captured it beautifully. At that moment of the negative sell or the inoculation hiring moment, one way we put it is the phrasing Emily used before, which is like, there's a lot of things here that other people would see as like what you have to do. We deliberately choose and name that same specific set of things as things we get to do. A different way of putting it that I found helpful in that hiring moment is to say, here are a few things about this job that are really challenging, that like culturally aligned, like very hardworking and top performing people have found difficult. What I'm about to give you, though, is a list of things. Is not a list of things that I want you to tolerate. It's a list of things you're telling me right now. If you say yes to this job, you are enthusiastic about jumping into. And then to Em's point, like you make sure some of that stuff is like in their Wheaties right in the first breakfast and in the first week to show that you're good for your word, and also to get them reps of doing that kind of work. I think it becomes that becomes actually more important as you scale, because it's easier for folks in the organization to get distant from the put it how you will, your end user, your customer, your community member, the person at the top of the servant leadership pyramid. It's just very, very easy to lose sight of that person, and to make decisions based on a whole variety of things that aren't what they've specifically identified as their needs and desires. And so, it's been helpful. It's also helpful to know, and it makes a culture more credible, not just like cakes on birthdays and motivational posters. If folks coming in get early signals that they're like, oh yeah, Brian's the CTO of this whole organization, and he's a serial founder, he's done that before, and he is also moving many fridges on the site, or he had to in his first days at work. I think there's a way in which like a lot of this is just very simple, like you're making a bunch of promises in a hiring process, and then once you get through that process, people are basically seeing how good you are for your word.
Is that on your website, that list, or is it different for every role? Like the don't take this job if you.
We try to tailor it. I guess the answer is both. So there's some stuff that we try to. So when it comes to the mission of the team, of the organization, the core values, we try to make those evergreen and like adaptable, so that it will work as well for the CEO as it does for the like brand new customer service representative. That said, there's stuff the customer service rep that's gonna be part of their daily diet, their bottom of the eye stuff that's very different than for the CEO. Both of them might be getting yelled at a bunch, but by different people for different reasons. We want both those cohorts to be like, great. There's a vulgar way that this is put by Mayor Carcetti in the Wire, but it's like, ooh, another bowl up to eat today. Can't wait. Give me a spoon. So the answer is both. Like, you want to have a set of things where it's like, one way we think about core values is it's like, it's almost like a list of permission slips for what you get to be really angry and fired up about and what you don't. And so like our core values at COVIDcheck were humility, action, and excellence. So it was like, you get to be really fired up that the healthcare system's slow and that the results for people of color and people in Northeast Denver are worse than the results for people who live, a few feet from where we're standing now. You get to be really mad about that and then go do something about it. You don't get to be really mad about the fact that you got to move a mini fridge at 6 a.m. when it's already hot as blazes in the middle of the summer, because humility is one of our values. Like, that's what you're signing up for, to be excited about. And then, you tailor it a new set for like this particular job. Yeah. Yes.
You talked about Tara. You were present for the participation of 1.0, and then we thought it was ending, and then 2.0. And what strikes me about COVIDcheck that's so unique is not only how quickly you scaled, but that you always knew there was the intention of doing it for a period of time, right? So there's this implication of scaling now with people, with humans. And I imagine the culture you built was instrumental in how you did that. But could you speak to the process of how the culture you built made for offboarding the company, or that, rolling it down when COVID got to the point where it could? Like, how did your culture allow you to do hard things?
We took the time, knowing that it was a finite process, we took the time to really make sure people were ready for what came next. So we, in addition to building that sense of community, it was also connections and making sure people had networks and places to go. So we really enforced that engagement and trying to keep people's minds as active as we could, even when knowing that, all right, my site's closing down in 2 weeks, now what do I do? We're still going to celebrate every accomplishment. We're still going to celebrate all of the people that you're testing and you're getting through. So continuing to push through and really encourage people to finish at their strongest and keep that momentum up, even knowing that it was ending. That was one of our really important steps that we felt like we needed to take. And I think it really launched people into the right place going forward, that people understood that, yeah, we're slowing down, but we still have to do something important all the way through the very last day.
So I'll give a specific CCC answer, and then I'm going to push it to Brian and Emily to talk about sort of, what has flowered from those seeds since. So COVID Check as a operating entity is now complete. So under Tara's leadership and that of a few others who unfortunately aren't on the panel today, we wound down all of our test sites over the last couple of months, largely in accord with what we thought was our role, which was we want to stand in the gap of testing access, particularly for communities that have the least of that access. And once that gap no longer exists, we don't need to continue to try to fight for survival as a going concern. That's actually a sign that like policy and the market have caught up to the needs of the community. And so that's actually is more or less what's happened. So now you can get free rapid tests that you can take right at home. You don't have to drive 15 or 20 minutes to get to a site and wait a day to get results. We were doing all that faster and in a more like customer-friendly way than the average organization. And it's still like many hours slower and much more costly than just using a free 15-minute test at your house. So we're actually pleased by that development, but that also means that, yeah, CCC, there's no more staff, there's no more operations, it's closed out. That said, part of the reason there was a 2.0 under Tara's leadership was Brian and Emily and I split off after 1.0 to try to basically create a team that would launch similar kinds of ventures on other social problems that Gary Community Ventures has been really focused on from the founding. So I'd love it if y'all could talk a little bit about the hottest project you've got going now. That's largely operating on the same kind of culture as CCC and the same principles, but it's a very different offering.
I'll start. Emily's actually leading this venture. But one project that we're working on now, we called My Friend Ben. It's actually kind of a platform in the benefit system. So let me, step back here. One problem area when we started talking to families at Gary is that everyone was having trouble accessing benefits and public benefits, tax credits. Like we talk about benefits in a very broad way. And we have about 100 families that are in like a very close relationship with our foundation. We're just getting data point after data point showing that like they may not know what benefits they're eligible for. They don't know how to access said benefit. Once you get into this system, it's maybe not as respectful as it needs to be. It doesn't give people the agency. And you don't know what value you're even going to get out of it if you put in the rather significant time sometimes depending on these benefits. So this was another kind of cross-sector problem, similar to COVID Check, where there's a lot of actors, and it's been a problem that everyone has been working on for quite some time. But similar to COVID Check, we're kind of experimenting with, is there a way for us to put kind of a tool in the middle, like as Gary, as an organization that's not necessarily a public agency or a nonprofit organization or a navigation organization, what role can we play to kind of help break some of the barriers that our families are running into? So we've built a screener right now that we're testing with our families that basically gives them the cash value ranked for every benefit that they're eligible for on a value threshold. So significant benefits, not maybe thousands, but we're talking about up to 30 different significant cash benefits. And we're just testing a series of assumptions with that around whether or not having that value, having the transparency of understanding how much time it's going to take you to apply for that and what you can expect, whether that helps people access more of those benefits. Because there's a lot left on the table right now for a lot of our families. So, but yeah, I'm interested in what you would say, Emily.
I don't have much to add to that, except that there's a similarity to COVID Check in that we are still employing this prototyping for scale and using our product as the key and core learning vehicle to understand what families want and need and how the product needs to be iterated to meet the family's wants and needs. Being the fun part about being at Gary is a lot of foundations, like the public benefit system, like no surprise, is a mess and siloed. And this is a system that many people just are, like it's too hard to fix. So let's like spend a lot of time maybe like doing research or thinking about policy changes. We sort of reject that and say that's good work, that should continue. But if we can use the value of a product with real families who can give us real feedback very quickly. The learning cycle on what can be sort of an enormous challenge that like a solution isn't apparent really shrinks. And that's the sort of special and fun work we get to do at Gary, is to challenge the assumption that foundations are slow and can't play in that sort of innovative startup-y space. I think they can, and they should do more of this kind of experimentation, small-scale tests of change to think about solving big problems in the community.
Yeah, I'll make a quick plug. I think part of this, and this is another place where Clayton under Becky's leadership and Gary under Mike's are, I think, cousins or siblings. It's an attitude toward risk and a belief that actually if you are a community institution, even one that works in a sector that's as deeply under-resourced as early childhood, my argument, if I just get on a soapbox, would be you have a responsibility to take risks based on the desires of and needs of your community and the folks around you. That's especially true when you're a foundation. Like, your whole job's to push the money out the door. And I think sometimes organizations, particularly as they age and grow, they can become more self-regarding than community-regarding, even when their mission remains as noble as it has ever been. A very concrete example of that at Gary is we also take big swings on policy. And like this fall, in the ballot coming in your mailbox in just a few days, maybe a couple weeks, is Proposition 123. So basically, we worked through a lot of this kind of small prototyping Emily's talking about, with a whole variety of community groups that work in affordable housing and supporting families and people who are experiencing homelessness, to try to come up with a way that statewide we could make more housing affordable for more people. That's not traditional foundation work, is to like build a big coalition and run a very expensive statewide ballot measure. And based on what we heard from the same families we serve and work with and talk to, they need a place to live and they need that to be easier to procure. And so that's a lot of words to say, vote Proposition 123. And if you're at all tied to the philanthropic sector, like, encourage your people and your organizations to take bigger risks based on the feedback you get from the people you serve. I think we've got time for maybe one more question, and then I'll wrap us up. Yes. Yeah, please.
Depends on where you're entering here, but I think from my perspective, ideally you have an executive in a leadership position who believes in that mindset and values that and is willing to model that on a daily basis. And I remember coming into my role, and one of our teachers came over to meet me, and she said, "This is the first, I've been here 18 years, this is the first time I've been in the CEO's office." And I thought that was crazy. But it was telling in terms of how tied the organization was to a role hierarchy, essentially. So I would just say, for those leaders who are in a position to hire, you got to hire for that value at all levels. And more important than anybody, to, like, one of my favorite things was like walking the COVID check line in the morning, because it was a great chance to, especially if it was freezing, first of all, to be out there checking in with our families, finding out what else they needed, just to be in relationship with people. And yeah, I always think of like school principals who are giving a tour and will stop to pick up the trash on the floor, because I care about this building and this culture, and our kids deserve excellence. So I think it's just get the point just modeled from the leadership itself, and hiring at all levels for that.
Well said. All right. Well, I think I'm going to close this out. Thanks so much, all of you, for being here. And we're all on LinkedIn. We're also all here in Denver. So.
Hey, I was just going to say, I'm here from Atlanta. Nisha Nice, I'm an artist, and then I also work with this startup
I'm pausing because there's a lot of options to choose from here. Yeah. I mean, the first one was I think the first one was credibility. So, now it feels like fun and cool to be like, yeah, no one had any healthcare experience, but that did not feel fun and cool at the beginning because people were like, why are you even working on this? Like, you're getting in the way, or like, this isn't your lane. This isn't Gary's lane. And that was a big one early. I would say later, as we started to grow really fast, things that work and pieces of your culture and your operation that work really well at the size of 3 or 10 people, they just start to break once you get to 30, and then once you get to 100, and then once you get to 200 or 500. Because at 3 or 10, like, pretty much our day was just like being on one big Zoom meeting with each other all day long. Like, it was all just kind of like we were all cooking in the same kitchen. But then once you get to 50, it's like, oh, we're a chain restaurant now, and I don't even know the guy who's doing this job. But we need some structures. We need to be able to tell, like, Brian, like, actually, you don't need to come to these meetings anymore. Like, you got to go code, or you got to go, like, teach someone else how to code, or whatever. So those were two that come to mind. Yeah.
I was just going to add, like, in the spirit of inclusion too, that for us a huge issue was skepticism about, from our families, particularly from our Black families around, and our Latino families as well, around the vaccine when it came out, the testing process, the healthcare system generally. The idea, what in startup world we may think is exciting to be part of a pilot or a lab or testing, has very deep and problematic roots in the Black community in terms of, like, you're testing this thing on our kids. This, like, we've been down that road before and it has not gone well. And so for the solve for us on that was just very deep relationships and very trusted teacher partners, influencers in our community, families who had the ear of other families and literally were like doing the equivalent of door knocking to say, this is the way we're going to collectively get our kids back to school and keep our teachers safe. And that took months to get there. But I think, the trust piece is just, like, can't be overlooked.
All right. Thanks, everyone.